There was this kingdom called High Hills where a king lived with his only child, a daughter. The king was a single dad and found all his joy and happiness in raising his little girl. As the years went by, the princess blossomed into an extremely beautiful young woman. Not only was she a stunner, but she was crazily talented when it came to music. She could sing like an angel and play the guitar like a pro. But here's the sad part, despite her beauty and talents, the king pretty much ignored her most of the time. He was always preoccupied with running the kingdom and never made time for his daughter. The poor girl tried everything she could to get his attention and make him proud. She'd serenade him daily with her angelic voice and skilled guitar playing, hoping he'd notice her and they could bond over music. One day, she was performing for him as usual when out of nowhere, this tiny flea started hopping around the king. Instead of paying attention to his daughter's incredible performance, the king got completely sidetracked by the flea. He was instantly more fascinated by this insignificant bug than his own flesh and blood showcasing her amazing gifts. The audience went wild cheering for the princess after she finished, but the king could not care less. He was laser-focused on that flea, watching its every hop like it was the greatest show on earth. The guy was just weird, getting all excited over stupid, pointless things instead of appreciating his talented daughter right in front of him. He eventually got up and wandered off to his chambers, still studying the flea intently and even letting it snack on his blood. The princess had this really weird hobby where she was obsessed with dreaming about her future husband. She would spend hours listening to romantic storybooks and hoping her own life would turn out just like those fairy tales. For the past few days, the king had been feeding this tiny little flea until it grew to be the size of a baby frog that just hatched. And he spent so much time locked away in his room, just playing with that flea. Then one night at dinner, the princess started going on about how she wanted to get married and have her own kingdom to rule over with her husband. This made her so distracted that she pushed her plate away, claiming the food wasn't even cooked good enough for a person to eat. The king just took her plate and went right back to his room. Once inside, he actually put the food down for that flea, which had now ballooned up to be as big as a large dog. He had been keeping this giant creature hidden under his bed, out of sight from everyone. It was his own little secret that he didn't tell a single soul about. When the first light of day came, the king's guards rushed to find the royal doctor, saying there was some kind of emergency. The doctor figured it was just the king's health problems acting up again. But when he entered the king's bedroom, he was in for a huge shock. That flea had blown up to be about 12 times bigger than the king himself, and it looked like it was about to die from being so monstrously overweight. The doctor had no clue what to even diagnose it as, since he had never seen a beast like that before in his life. That giant flea ended up dying just a few minutes later. The king then warned the doctor to never tell anyone about what he had seen in the bedroom. Meanwhile, the princess was super excited to try on this fancy new gown that the king had given her. She thought for sure this meant the king was finally getting her ready to get married. But the truth was, neither her nor the king actually knew who this supposed husband was going to be yet. See, they had this plan to reveal the husband through a kind of test. Until some man could pass this test, the princess would be stuck living in the palace with her dad for the rest of her life. So the king took the skin off that massive dead flea and hung it up in the courtyard. He announced that any man who could correctly name the animal that skin came from would win the princess's hand in marriage. Guys came from all over trying their luck at guessing, but not a single one could name that it was a flea skin, until this old, giant, creepy-looking ogre decided to take a whiff. Somehow he got it right away, declaring it was a flea pelt. By then, the king had already secretly told the princess the answer, so there was no way out. She was going to have to marry this grotesque swamp monster. The princess was devastated. After growing up reading all those fairy tales about beautiful princesses marrying charming princes, how could she be forced to wed such an ugly brute? But the king wouldn't hear it. In a rage, he went through with the deal, handing his daughter over to the vile ogre against her wishes. This ogre didn't even have a proper home, just a cave in the wilderness. He dragged the poor princess through thick forests and bushes, having her hike up a steep cliff to this cavern. There wasn't so much as a wooden chair or setting for dishes inside. The princess was left with absolutely none of the basic comforts, all alone with her monstrous new husband. The princess had to live in the putrid stench of animal bones scattered all around that cave, and that vile ogre could only provide her with rotten, spoiled meat to eat. She was kept locked away as his prisoner for so long, until one day, she heard some noises coming from the other side of the cliff. To her surprise, it was a woman. The princess frantically called out, begging to be rescued, but the woman didn't have any way to help her right then. However, she promised she'd come back the next day with her son, and they'd find a way to save the princess. Sure enough, the next morning the woman returned with her whole family in tow. Together they fashioned a bridge using just some ropes stretched across the gap in the cliff. The son bravely made his way across to reach the cavern and the trapped princess. But as they were trying to make their way back, that wretched ogre caught wind that there were others around. He smelled the strange people and saw the group trying to free his captive. In a desperate rage, he started violently swinging his massive arms, determined to keep the princess prisoner. Thankfully, the rescue team made it across to the other side just in time. They quickly cut the rope bridge, sending the ogre plummeting down into the deep chasm below the cliff. As they all hurried away from there, the princess thought she was finally free and could return home. But shockingly, the ogre suddenly reappeared right in the midst of their caravan party. He immediately set upon killing every last member of the brave family who tried to rescue the princess. When he finally got to her, he prepared to finish her off too. But for some strange reason, he hesitated, almost showing a hint of pity. The princess saw her chance. She played along being meek and helpless to calm the brute. Then, when the ogre turned his back, she grabbed a blade and slashed his throat in one fatal strike. She had finally slain her monstrous captor once and for all. The princess took the ogre's severed head back to the palace and went straight to the king, who was deathly ill at this point. She shoved the grotesque head in his face as a reminder of the unforgivable way he had failed her as a father by cruelly giving her away to this abusive beast. After shoving that ugly ogre's severed head in her father's face, the whole kingdom realized what a brave and courageous warrior the princess truly was. She had single-handedly slain the monstrous beast that had held her captive for so long. Her feat of taking down that massive, vicious ogre was more daring than any act performed by even the bulliest knight or soldier. The people were in awe of the princess's bravery and heroics. So, with the old king on his deathbed, they looked to her as the new ruler of the land. In a grand ceremony, she was officially crowned and enthroned as the brand new queen to reign over the entire kingdom. As the princess-turned-queen raised her head to look out over her new subjects, her gaze shifted up to the bright skies above. That's when she spotted him. The very same young man who had first tried to rescue her by using that rope bridge across the chasm. Her heart swelled with joy to see that he had survived the ogre's rampage. After being forcibly given away to that wretched creature, the queen was finally free to choose her own husband by her own will. And there he was, the brave and caring soul who had risked his life to save her. Perhaps she had found her future king to rule by her side after all.